Hi, welcome back to my channel, and thank you for clicking on this video and being interested in the global coordination for protecting nature and just history and systems thinking in general. So the Conference of Parties, better known as COPs, started around 1992 when the leadership of more than 150 countries came together to recognize climate change as the planetary emergency that it is. It was an incredible start to the conversation on how we can come together and tackle the most interconnected, complex crisis that humanity has ever faced. But have you ever wondered how much actually gets done? I sure have. So today I want to go into the history of the COPs to see how far we have come collectively and then explore a bit of the gap between what we say we're doing and what we're actually doing. And I hope you will join me. It all started not that long ago, actually, 1992, with the foundation of the UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change. From there, the conferences started happening, assessing the issues that we needed to tackle, building the foundation of knowledge required to address these issues, and then laying down the path of action. Very early on, it became clear that we needed to collectively reduce global emissions, and that voluntary pledges were simply not enough. We needed binding targets, ones that we could monitor and track and then report. In 1997, the Kyoto Protocol defined these targets in the first legally binding treaty to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Some key features included the introduction of carbon markets, where emissions could be traded. 37 industrialized countries signed up, although major ones like the US never really ratified. And then other ones like China and India, they didn't really had any obligation because they were considered developing nations. Crazy to think about it looking back now. It was a start, but obviously a weak one, considering big players weren't really fully participating. The Organization for Long-Term Global Change, unfortunately, takes a long time to discuss. This reminds me of the Entmoot from Lord of the Rings, the Conference of the Ents, where anything that is worth saying takes a long time to say. So it was almost a decade later, in 2005, that the Kyoto Protocol officially entered into force. Even with the absence of big players like the US, and honestly some pretty powerful opposition from economic interests, countries still came together in Montreal to launch negotiations into the action plan that would bind Kyoto's commitments beyond 2012, which was the initial timeline that they had. This was the birth of the long game, where multilateral collective climate action showed that it could survive political pushback from the status quo. Then, in Cancun, the Green Climate Fund was created to channel funds from developed countries to developing ones. The goal? $100 billion a year to fund climate action in the places most affected. Cancun also recognized the need to limit global warming to below 2 degrees Celsius. It might seem like a small number, right? 2 degrees Celsius. But think about it in a planetary scale. Imagine how much heat you have to put into the atmosphere to raise the temperature of the entire planetary atmosphere by 2 degrees. It's almost incomprehensible to our human mind. But it's similar to when our own bodies get sick, right? The stable climate of our body is 37 degrees. 39? That's a fever. It's a small increase, but it means something is wrong with your body, and it feels like trash. You can't get out of bed, your head hurts, your brain's all fuzzy from all the burning up. Blow this up to a planetary scale, and that's essentially what's happening to our beloved planet Earth. A sustained, increasing fever that's been skyrocketing since the 60s. And the cause? Emissions from fossil fuels. But I digress. Coming back to the COP. Shortly after, in 2012, the Kyoto Protocol was extended to 2020. This gave it legal continuity. But unfortunately, participation was still low, and many countries started trying to negotiate leeways in emissions instead of trying to find ways to lower them. The Warsaw Conference acknowledged the loss and damage that climate change had already caused, especially on island nations, which are the canaries in the coal mine. No pun intended. Or maybe pun intended, because emissions from fossil fuels cause irreversible damage. For example, the loss of land due to sea level rise, which quite literally salts the earth. It erases livelihoods, agricultural productivity, ecosystems, and forced the displacement of millions of people so far. Even back then, a decade ago, climate change was already causing severe impacts on multiple scales of human life. Warsaw attempted to address this through the International Mechanism for Loss and Damage, which recognized that compensation was needed beyond support for adaptation because some damages were beyond repair or mitigation. It was a sobering acknowledgement considering how many countries were really not taking climate change that serious just 1 year prior. Then in 2015, the Paris COP happened and everything changed. Huge shift in organization and commitment worldwide. Extreme events like floods, heat waves, and droughts made climate impacts impossible to ignore. Science got louder as the IPCC of 2014 bluntly called out humans as the cause for climate change. Youth, indigenous people, and frontline communities reframed climate action as a justice and survival issue, not just an environmental one, and even goaded Pope Francis with his Laudato Si, which means praise be to you, on care for our common home, reframed climate action as a moral and spiritual responsibility. The culture was already changing, and so did our framework response. Kyoto's top-down targets were replaced by NDCs, nationally determined contributions. This added clarity and dodged the you first, then us dialogue that was fairly divisive. On top of that, US and China announced a joint climate deal which aligned the two largest emitters and set the stage for everyone else to join. 2 degrees Celsius was no longer acceptable, and then we aimed for 1.5 instead, with a focus on transparency and ratchet mechanisms to update these pledges every 5 years. Suddenly, everyone had skin in the game, and participation became universal. It was a historic moment when 195 parties committed, despite obligations not really being legally binding. It was a shift. And then Katowice created the Paris Rulebook, which outlined detailed guidelines on how to implement the tracking, reporting, and transparency that was required by the NDCs. This turned the Paris Agreement from a vision into an operating system with a clear procedure. Glasgow's Climate Pact made the first explicit reference to begin phasing down coal, and over 100 countries signed a pledge to reduce methane by 30%. This matters because methane is a very, very powerful greenhouse gas. It's 80 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. Also, the rules for the carbon markets that we talked about early on were finally finalized. It took years of negotiation and discussion to reach 2 key mechanisms. Article 6.2, which stated that countries can transfer internationally transferred mitigation outcomes to each other, the credits, and Article 3.4, which built upon Kyoto's Clean Development Mechanism and allowed companies and countries to finance climate beneficial projects and then earn credits for it. Egypt's COP also built on previous work, creating a fund for loss and damages that was based on the Warsaw concept. It was a landmark decision to support the canneries in the coal mine nations. Through all this, framework of action was strengthened, and we built better guidelines for transparency and operation, but action still falling short. Almost another decade after the Paris Agreement, Dubai's COP brought us the first global stocktake from these targets. We aimed to keep heating below 1.5, but NDC reports put us on the track for 2.5 up to almost 3 degrees of warming. This is quite literally a catastrophic outcome. So, there was an explicit call to transition away from a global energy system that relies on burning fossil fuels. But these discussions were watered down, or maybe oiled down, because the COP was being hosted by one of the biggest oil-producing states in the world. Still, the Dubai COP exposed the real effects of the gap between our pledges and our actions, and also the consequences of weak enforcement and accountability. From all of these discussions, Azerbaijan focused heavily on climate finance in 2024. They set new finance goals that went beyond the $100 billion a year pledge from the Cancun's Green Climate Fund, which, by the way, was not met. Which brings us to the present, 2025, where the COP30 will be hosted by Brazil. This COP is expected to be the most important one since Paris. The promise is to raise ambitions from national to global determined contributions, explore paradigm-shifting finance options and mobilization for them, implement nature-based solutions across the board, and then strengthen government frameworks that are already moving forward. The Brazilian government is calling this COP the implementation COP because they're really focused on building on all the good work done so far. But they want to transition all of that from mostly talking to literal action and implementation. From what I gather, their action agenda is based on 6 thematic axes related to the main issues of climate change. And then within these axes, there's 30 key objectives to tackle. Each of these objectives is tackled by an activation group, which are collectives of initiatives that sprouted from previous COPs. It's basically a way to bring together these fragmented projects that resulted from all this work that we've been doing, but then put it into a united front under the 6-axis umbrella, which can be scaled through bringing in public and private stakeholders, civil societies, all that jazz, in what they call solutions accelerating plans. It's quite a smart strategy, and I'm really looking forward to see how Brazil goes about coordinating this massive action agenda. I would really like to be there, honestly, and I have tried. The Lulu is real, but there's still time. Any of you watching have any possible way where you can find a way for me to go to the COP in Brazil? Please leave a comment down below. I don't know if you can hear my little birdie. Well, here he is. If you can hear him in the background, I'm sorry, or you're welcome. He's very passionate about global climate action. On a personal note, I feel having the COP in the Amazon, the lungs of planet Earth, is huge. Forests are front and center this year, protecting what we have, reversing deforestation, financing solutions. Finally, honestly, I really think that modern humanity doesn't really realize the importance of nature. Indigenous people have always known. Ancient civilizations also knew. But in our modern worlds, under our economic system, a forest only has value when it's cut down for timber, for cattle grazing, for profit, money. And yet, trees are living beings. They take decades to grow, they give us oxygen, a whole bunch of other environmental services that we never consider. They purify our water, they sustain life. Everything that breathes oxygen in the atmosphere is only here because of plants. Think about this. In the beginning, Earth's atmosphere was almost all carbon dioxide and methane, totally unbreathable. Life could only exist in the oceans. Then, tiny phytoplankton started photosynthesizing, making oxygen in the water. For billions of years, it soaked into the oceans until eventually it was saturated and it leaked into the atmosphere. Suddenly, respiration became possible outside of the water and life slowly crawled out of it. Plants slowly took over, forests rose from the earth, and slowly but surely, over billions of years, they transformed this planet into a paradise. Every single living being that breathes oxygen on this planet owes its life to plants and photosynthesis. And we consider them things, stuff to use, stuff to log, stuff to sell, stuff to burn. It's something to think about. We either change our ways and start valuing nature as the foundation of all life, something to nurture and protect the same way that it does to us, or sooner than we imagine, the same fate that we put onto nature will be our own. As it is now, as we see, we are already seeing the effects of this. So I hope the COP in Brazil becomes a turning point for the entire planet, for the sake of all of us. And I think we can do it. I really think we can do it. We're just really focused on the status quo right now. This is the only way that we can think or do things because there is a very huge economic and social collective effort to make it seem like this is the only way of doing things. But clearly, the COPs, through very slow, gradual change, conversation, organization, we have been setting up the systems to create a better world that is absolutely possible. And not only is it possible, it is cheaper, it is regenerative, it's the way that nature wants to move forward. If we start listening to indigenous people, if we start listening to nature and observing more than actually imposing our will, imposing what we think we know, if we start listening more and slowing down instead of having this mentality of infinite growth, we will see that a better world is not only possible, but it is the only way. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you learned something from it. If you have any thoughts, please leave a comment. Please send me a message. I would love to engage with people through these videos that I make. I try keeping this brief Turned out to be really difficult to do that. I always try to keep things brief, guys. I promise I'm not trying to make you sit there for 20 minutes listening to stuff, but it's like the ants. Anything that is worth saying takes a very long time to say it. See you in the next video.